Thank you, ladies, both. Honored to speak with two brilliant, talented artists. We have Christine Swanson, who is a filmmaker, writer, director. We have Aunjanue Ellis, who is also a versatile artist. She is a producer, writer as well. Before we get started talking about the film, I want to know, how are you two doing?
I'm stuck in a house with my family. It could be worse.
That's true. That's true. And what about you, Aunjanue? How are you doing during this time?
I'm all right. I'm all right. I'm away from my family actually, so that's hard. But I'm just hoping that things will get back to pretend normal. Pretend normal.
Well, what drew you guys to the arts, Christine?
I was a student at the University of Notre Dame, and Spike Lee came to talk about Do the Right Thing. And growing up, I grew up in Detroit, Michigan. So just hearing another artist talking about his craft, I did not know that people made movies for a living until I encountered Spike Lee. So that kind of opened up my imagination a little bit, and then the rest was all exploring what the possibilities were. And I kind of followed his path by going to film school, and then that opened up a whole new world. And you're around other artists and brilliant people, and that kind of inspired me to just see what I was made of. I'm still trying to figure that out.
I mean, I guess in a way, I'm still being drawn. I'm still being drawn, and when I say that. I did not have anybody around me when I was a child who made a living through the arts, but I was raised in Mississippi and raised in a Baptist church in Mississippi. And I hear you're from Memphis.
I am.
Well, I don't know how they do things in Memphis, but in Macomb, Mississippi, like you're required to be in all the Christmas plays, all the Easter plays, all of that. So that was sort of my first, you had to say an Easter speech. You had to do all that. You had to memorize all these scriptures. So, that was like, that's performance. Right. That's performance. And that was sort of my first understanding of what the arts were. And I'm still pulled by that. In terms of like me wanting to be an actor, it was never anything that I wanted to be. But now I'm older, I realize that sometimes people have to see things in you if you can't see them for yourself. And someone else saw that in me. And they encouraged me to apply to graduate school, apply to change colleges, and just completely switch around my life. And I'm still sort of figuring out, where I want to land, or if I want to land at all, in terms of like what I want to do, what I want to continue to do with the arts. And I'm excited. And I'm so excited that I got to do Clark Sisters with Christine, because she's so inspiring, and she's such a warrior. Like, that's what I feel about Christine Swanson, is she's so committed to being an artist.
Listening to her answer, it dawned on me, like, I grew up in church too. And I was in all the church plays as well. And I had speaking roles. I did all of that. It's interesting, like seeing it through Aunjanue, your lens, is that I never felt comfortable as a performer. We had to do it because that's right. We were obligated to do it. So that, I guess I had that background too. I just didn't take it that seriously because I was like, let me just get through this, and get on the other side of it, because I just never felt comfortable in front of. But again, when I had that encounter with Spike Lee, I realized there was another part of it, and that's behind of, if I can say. So having that experience too, being forced into performance, only through church though, because in school it was voluntary, and I never volunteered to do anything performing arts related. But I absolutely was exposed to all elements of performance, oratory pieces, music, because of church. So I think it fundamentally grounded me in ways that obviously I didn't even realize until Aunjanue said that. So that's kind of like my background on some level, growing up in Detroit, being a member of Oak Grove AME Church, and just growing up with a lot of elders and people who kind of laid the groundwork for a foundation that I think I still adhere to this day.
Would you say that that's how you go about with your projects then? Is that how you've been able to stick with like a lot of the faith-based film, or do you even consider that a genre? Like, are these films with the Clark sisters and?
Not at all.
Okay.
Not at all. See, I think they're mutually exclusive on some level. I look at it like when we're creating art, I don't look at it through a faith lens. I just look at it through a creative lens. And maybe perhaps because of my backgrounds and my beliefs, that kind of weighs in on some level, but that absolutely is not the way I come into a project. It just so happens that this was a project about women from the Church of God in Christ. And I was honestly drawn to it because they're from Detroit, and I'm from Detroit. And I just felt like there was something that I could bring, or in terms of service to their storytelling, that I was just compelled to do.
All right. And what would you say to that as far as your approach and the way you came into the project, Aunjanue?
Well, I was raised Baptist. So the way that I knew about the Clark sisters was through one of my best friends when I was a little girl. Her name was Tracy Grady. And Tracy Grady was this incredible singer. And she was raised in the Church of God in Christ. So she would always talk about the Clark sisters. I mean, she would talk about Dr. Mattie and the conventions that they would go to and the workshops that they would go to. She would always talk, and I was like, that is so fascinating, because they had a way of doing church that was completely different from how we did church, like the level of spirituality, it's that Pentecostal tradition was, even though we was hot in my church, like it was another level. Like I couldn't keep up with how they clapped. They were dancing, to me, it was another experience. So I was fascinated by that. So that was sort of the seed. And then later on, I, became aware of their music beyond You Brought the Sunshine, which is what everybody knows and loves. Right.
Right.
And they became the soundtrack for my life. They got me through hard situations. They were my water in dry places. They were my joy driving over, these bridges in New Orleans, Louisiana. Like all of these memories are ingrained in my brain, and all of them, the musical backdrop for all of that is the Clark sisters. So when I got a letter saying that I had been offered this job, I don't know, I felt it was a little full circle in my mind.
Another component that I see that you guys have a lot of common thread in, that you guys have both did TV and film. And I wanted to talk about the differences between a feature film and a network TV film.
I think you said something about this the other day, Christine. You said it's a writer's medium. What did you say about that?
Yeah, so filmmaking is a director's medium, television is a writer's medium, and theater is an actor's medium. That's what I said. And meaning each different take, the emphasis is on a different perspective. So filmmaking, it's all about the director's vision for the most part. And everything starts from that perspective. Television is a writer's medium because the writers are the showrunners. They're the executive producers, and they're the people who are controlling the storytelling on a day-to-day. And then theater, even though you do have directors and producers, it truly is an actor's medium because the actors have to show up every day and calculate and perform in ways that's so heavily dependent on them. If you don't have actors for theaters, then you ain't got no show, you know? So it's, I mean, and that actors you need for everything, but particularly the theater, people come to see actors on the stage. So television, being a writer's medium, that's the goal. Let's get these pages out, you know, and you know, get it shot, you know, and on to the next one is what I feel in terms of the pacing, you know.
Well, I wanted to talk about how do you guys overall think that the story, what is the story that people will get to see?
It's about the Clark sisters. And I think like when you try to tell, when anybody should do any story about Black genius, particularly, and these women were Black geniuses. They are Black geniuses. You have to, no one is ever going to reach the level of excellence of Twinkie Clark. Like, let's not try, because her contribution to music is some of the most significant in the canon of Western music and Eastern music as well, because she comes from an African tradition as well. You're not going to match her as a composer, as a player of the piano, as a player of the organ. You're not going to match that. You're not going to match. No one can sing like them, you know. So all you can do, the best that you can do, is try to be honest. That's all you can do, and hope that who they are will be conveyed through our attempts at honesty. And so what Christine and I worked together in doing, along with the other young women who played my daughters, Raven, Charlé, Christina, Kiera, Angela. What we try to do is try to be honest. So through that honesty, you know, we would be a window for people to see the lives of these women. What I have found is that, or what people kind of don't think about, at least I don't think about it, is that, you know, genius doesn't come in an incubator, right? Doesn't come in a lab. I mean, in a lab somewhere. You know what I mean? Like Stevie Wonder wasn't in a lab and we got him out of a lab. Prince wasn't in a lab and we went somewhere and got him out of a lab. He was raised in a house. You know what I'm saying? He was raised in a home. He had parents, for better or for worse, whatever these parents were. They were in domesticated situations. They lived lives that look like our lives when they're children, at least up to a point, at least with Stevie Wonder. So they have to eat, they do homework, they do all these things that we do. But what hopefully we try to achieve with this, or we try to do, was to show what is the incubation of genius, of Black genius. It's a house full of Karen Clark and Dorinda Clark and Twinkie Clark. And you know, it's how, what does that look like? You know? And one of the things that it was so incredibly important to me is that when we choose to tell stories about Black women, and that is a huge responsibility for me. It's huge. And I feel like Christine feels the same way. It's an honor. It's an honor. It's a privilege to do it, but it's a huge responsibility. And what we cannot do is take that lightly. We cannot take it lightly, because our experience is sort of tossed in the wind when it's done by other people. So we just cannot do that. So for me, one of the things that was so important is, okay, if we're going to tell these stories about these 5 Black geniuses, how are we going to do that? What approach are we going to take? Are we going to take the same approach that's usually taken when we tell stories about women? Or are we going to talk about stuff that's like small and trifling, that makes us small and insignificant and trifling? Or are we going to treat the stories about Black women the same way we treat stories about like Martin Luther King or Malcolm X?
How are you, Christine, able to do that as a director?
Well, that's always the biggest obstacle, is telling the story that you want to tell within the time constraints that you're given. You know, something that I kind of realized as I was directing this film was, typically when I approach like a film, especially if it's something that I wrote, I realize like my role on this film was different than it would have been on something that was written by me. And I quickly kind of started to understand that my role was one of a conduit and not as of specifically the visionary per se, because what was most important was to tell these women's stories in ways that I felt did them justice. So my goal was to take all those different pieces and find a way to become a conduit for it to mesh and to shine. And sometimes, most times I'm leading on a technical front, but I'm also following on a creative front. And sometimes I'm led creatively by what other people are giving me. And my job is to organize that, right? So that's the hardest thing is organizing all these wonderful storylines in such a short amount of time and dealing with so many moving parts, because we had 5 sisters, a mother, and just like almost a huge lifetime of storytelling to squeeze into less than 2 hours. So I think on many levels, I don't know how successful we were in thoroughly telling all those different story parts, but I think the parts that stand out will resonate enough to give people a taste and some level of satisfaction for everything that is beautiful and wonderful and great about these women.
So, okay, imagine that. And then imagine, trying to capture a mother's relationship with 5 kids, with 5 daughters. If they weren't the Clark sisters, how do you do that? If they, regular folks that go to the Clark sisters church, who can properly capture that in the amount of time that we did? What I would have to do is, I would try to find places where even if I weren't in conversation with, one of the daughters, I would, find a place where I could hold their hand, or I could just show intimacy wherever I could grab it, So that was what I had to do. I mean, Twinkie is the most popular legacy of Mattie Moss. And I think when Dr. Mattie, she turned over the baton, literally turned over the baton to Twinkie. And she was the articulation, I think, of all of songs that I think Dr. Mattie could sing in her head, but she could not necessarily play those songs or compose those songs. And here she had a daughter that could do that. So, in terms of her legacy, of course, Twinkie is the living legacy of that particular thing, of her aesthetic. But she was incredibly close to Dorinda because Dr. Mattie was a minister of sorts, and Dorinda is an evangelist. Karen's voice, her relationship with Jackie, she was incredibly close with Jackie because Jackie was her caregiver. And then her relationship with Denise, it was fraught. But, at the same time, that there was an incredible amount of love there, that, they still live. They deal with that now,
I really appreciated all of those unique and special efforts that Aunjanue did make, like in terms of expressing closeness. And my job was to try to capture that, as the director. But it's great when you're given that, and it adds like layers of emotional connectivity that, sometimes may be absent in stories for certain networks or what have you. But I really felt like a lot of that was led by and created by what the actors were giving me. And and I appreciate having achieved that on some level. You do feel like there's a absolute sisterhood among the actresses who play the sisters, and then Aunjanue's connection with each of them on camera feels real and authentic. And when you think about the individual relationships that Mattie Moss Clark had with each of those daughters, I'm just warmed as a mother, because you just see how much she deposited into each of them. And like, I don't know how many years it's been since Mattie Moss Clark has been deceased, but those women today still carry her legacy so strongly in their lives that it's palpable, you know, and it's really inspiring and moving on so many levels. And I really felt like the spirit of Mattie Moss Clark, like in the realm, you know. Someone asked, like, well, what do you think was your directing style, like, you know, on the movie? And I think it was a bit, I was more of a, like, authority.
Mattie Moss Clark?
Yes, right? It was authoritarian. And in hindsight, I was thinking, like, sometimes I'm like, was I too tough? Was it too much? And I'm, you know, honestly, like, when you think of who Mattie Moss Clark was, I probably didn't even come close.
Dr. Clark was a, you know, she was a strategist. Mm-hmm. She was a strategist. She was Joe Jackson before there was Joe Jackson. Do you know what I mean? And she was a matriarchal Joe Jackson. That's a bad example, but I want to say that because sometimes people, you have to give people a male reference so they can understand the genius of women. So that's why I'm saying that. No one was directing choirs like that before Dr. Clark came along. Nobody was doing that. She changed that game. Nobody was doing harmonies in choirs before Dr. Mattie was doing that. She changed that whole game. So you could arguably say that Dr. Mattie changed the course of American music, because in our zeal, in this country's zeal to downplay Black contribution to culture, what we don't acknowledge and what we don't recognize is that blues and gospel are the root, are the seed, are the building blocks for everything that you hear on the radio right now, period. There would be no single ladies. There would be no songs if those building blocks were not there. And Destiny's Child, when those women listened to the Clark sisters. That's right. They listened to them even if they didn't think they listened to them.
That's right.
Because that was put into the canon before they were born, and it was living already. So they just pulled from it. So Dr. Clark, what she did is that she was doing something that had never been done before in a culture, and in a macro culture, and then also a micro culture, the Kojic church, that was not really done before. She was, as a woman, doing and being successful at it. You hear people, when I was studying her, you know, I hear people who were in her workshops, and they talked about how mean she was, and they, you know, talked about how she threw shoes at people, and and it's funny now, and you're like, oh, that was a lot, you know, but you cannot argue with is what she achieved.
You know, besides paying homage to them through this movie, that women, these stories need to be told more, or we need to recognize these women's contributions more.
So our job is we have technical craft, right? So our job is to apply that to real truth, you know? Let's not get lost in the truth. And I think the elevation of the stories will rise in and of themselves, especially when you're doing a biopic. Like, you don't want to make up too much that didn't happen when what did happen is so rich and worthy of exploration.
I think that this idea of what is truth, I mean, we weren't doing a documentary, you know, we weren't doing dramatized reenactments. So I don't want any filmmaker or writer to, to think, well, I can't try stuff. I can't be creative. That's not, that's not what I would say at all. I think that, the spirit of something is equally as important as that. I listened to Dr. Mattie and transcribed some of the things that she said, and I wrote those things down and I said them verbatim. I think, Christine, you actually pulled from Dr. Mattie's funeral, right? Mm-hmm. And gave, and those were the words that Denise actually spoke. Mm-hmm. Am I right? Mm-hmm. Right?
Yes.
So, but even within that, even with our using their exact words, they didn't necessarily happen. They weren't told and they weren't said in the chronology of the program and the funeral program. None of it happened the way it happened, is what I'm saying. But
sure.
We can look at that. We can look at that hopefully and say the spirit of what happened between these women was protected.
Let me qualify what I meant by the truth. Okay, so there is truth in terms of what happened. So, for instance, like there's Dorinda, and Dorinda really dealt with suicide and suicidal ideation. So I talked with her a little bit about, her point of view, and I took the truth of that, right? And then our job as creatives is to imagine within that realm of truth. That's what I meant. So there's not so much I had to make up per se, but where we had truth, there's always room now to add our creativity, because that's our job, So how we imagine it then in a film or a TV movie is not always going to be exactly how it happened in real life, But I love taking elements of truth and expounding upon it creatively, and then in the spirit of that, then we properly honor the people that we're trying to tell stories about. It really was like the creative juices just flowed and took over, and then that's what made it exciting. Was like, okay, how can we show that they were this? And in what ways can we amplify it in the storytelling? Okay, because again, we weren't making a documentary film. So that's a different approach, I believe, aesthetically, than just being factual. But taking a truth, expounding upon it, adding our own creative genius, and telling the story using the tools that we had at our disposal is kind of like what I live for, and I enjoy and I love doing.
I want to add to that a little bit. I think, no, I don't want to add to it. I got something else I want to say, because you said it perfectly, Christine. What I want to say is this: as someone who was raised in the church, as someone who still goes to church, and this is not about my beliefs at all. I preface this by saying this is not about my beliefs. I believe that the Black church is a cultural mecca for Black people, in a political mecca for Black people. And we can't take that lightly. We just cannot take that lightly, and also it's been the cause of a lot of oppression for us as well. So I don't take that lightly at all. I take it for all of its glory and all of its flaws. But what I do is I respect it. And I respect it because I see its articulation in almost every facet of Black life. Every facet of Black life, whether we want to acknowledge it or not. I see it. It is present. It is present in our best Black art. It is present in every facet of life of African American life, whether we acknowledge it or not, for good or bad, it's there. So for me, when I was on that set, I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. We were on the set and we were shooting in Toronto, right? And so we were in the middle of a church scene. And I looked to my left, and then we had a choir there. And they were over there snapping their fingers, just like this, like this, like going to town, just snapping their fingers. And I broke protocol, and I went over there and I was like, you can't be snapping your fingers. We in church. You got to be clapping your hands. We are in church. And so it's having an eye for that, having an eye for authenticity. Yeah. Authenticity is as valuable as truth, right? Like, so if you're on these sets, and whatever it is you're exploring, or whoever the subject is, there has to be somebody there that's present that will go, you can't be snapping your fingers, you in church. Mm-hmm. Like you shouldn't, you don't talk like that, because it's 1985 and people weren't saying those things yet. Mm-hmm. It's like, it's also honoring the authenticity of Black life that cannot get lost in any sort of creative thing or any sort of act of innovation or creativity. That those things cannot get lost. And let me say this, in a couple of weeks when the Clark sisters come on, people gonna be talking about us. You know what I mean? Like, they gonna be like, they didn't do this, they didn't do that, and they should have done this and they should have done that. And I hear that. And I think that it's important that we do hear those critiques. How are we going to get better if we don't?
Like you said, in 2 weeks, this film will be shown, what you would like the audience to know.
When I got a chance to meet all of the sisters for the first time, it was on a conference call on the telephone. The thing that I was most compelled to ask them, because I wanted to somehow convey their spirit individually in the storytelling, was I asked each of them, like, what is your testimony? Like, what can you tell me that I can take and then try to infuse it in the storytelling as the director, and I went through each of them one by one, and I asked them, tell me your testimony. They were surprised by that question, because, it was like, well, why does that matter? I'm like, it matters because you matter collectively and individually. So I always have to keep that balance, in the storytelling, because that's where you get specificity, and that's where you get nuance, and that's where you, again, connect with the characters individually. And I think, on a scale of 1 to 10, maybe I feel like I got a 6 out of achieving that specific agenda in terms of understanding what their individual testimony was. But I think collectively, maybe we get a higher score, because I think we will walk away understanding collectively who these women were, and specifically under their mother's tutelage. So that's that. I wanted to add that, because that was always important to me. And it wasn't my vision per se. It was my leadership, but I always felt, it's like I just felt like I was walking in the spirit of Mattie Moss Clark. And I didn't understand that at first, but when I got deep into production, I felt this connection to her, because on some level, I think I felt what she might have gone through on a smaller scale on my part, in terms of what she went through, perhaps in her whole life, and in creating the careers and the legacy of these women. So a big takeaway for me was I had a greater appreciation and a humbling epiphany about who I am and what I am as a woman in an industry that, you know, is male dominated. But that part I felt, because you look at Mattie Moss Clark, I can do that. I can handle that. But sometimes what's harder to overcome are our own shortcomings as a community, and perhaps as a community of people of faith.
First of all, Christine, can I tell you that what you just said is, I feel, should be a writing 101 when it comes to anybody trying to tell a story about the lives of Black people, or Black women particularly. What is your testimony? Isn't that it? How I'm telling you, I'm like, thank you, my God. What is your testimony to say to each of your characters? What is your testimony? I mean, and I'm just sitting here thinking, like, as a person, as me, Aunjanue, like, if somebody came to me right now and was like, what is your testimony? What would I say about myself? Or ask me, you know, and I just feel like, let's like take a pause on that piece of genius right there, because that's brilliant. And I think maybe that's the tool that can, like, prevent us when we are trying to tell these stories, like, in this way, trying to tell these stories in this medium, is, first of all, ask that. What is your testimony? And so everything that we do after that should fall in line with that, should be governed by that. And then all our little stuff that we want to bring to the table will be, like, secondary, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I just want to say that. But anyway, my favorite song by the Clark sisters is Endow Me. It just wears me out. Every time they do it, it just wears me out. When Twinkie did it live a few years ago, and she did a solo concert, and they joined her, it's just my favorite song by them. I want to say just two small things about them. One is Mattie Moss. This woman was told by the elders of her church, who were male, that she could not sing with her daughters anymore. And the reason why I know she was throwing shoes is because she felt within every cell of her body that this was her anointing. This is what God put her on earth to do. It was why she was born. And so anything that came short of that was for her a sin. And she could not sin before God. Her music, her direction, her composition was her gift, her tribute to God. And that's why she was so vigilant. That's why she was so hard and rough, because to do anything less than that was for her unacceptable in the eyes of God. That's one thing. Now, this woman was told that she could not do that. She could not live her anointing. Imagine what that feels like. Imagine what that feels like. When you know this is what you're supposed to do. This is what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to be behind this microphone right now telling stories, and somebody tells you, no, you can't do that. How that would feel. So yeah, we are living what Mattie Moss went through. You know, because she did what she did, we are able to do what we're able to do right now. I have no doubt about that. The other thing that I want to say is that about the genius of the Clark sisters is that these women were self-sustained. The genius of these women was self-sustained. A lot of times you hear about these women's groups, but somebody else is writing their music and giving them songs. The Clark sisters wrote their own music. They composed their own music. They played their own music. And Karen and Dorinda, they play. I think Karen or Dorinda plays the drums. My point is, they were a one-woman band. You know what I mean? Like they could do everything within themselves. That's unheard of. Even the Jacksons got other people writing for them. That's why when she's like, they're better than the Jackson 5, I meant that thing.
When I was working on the storytelling, there were a few songs that I got rid of, and there were other songs that I put in there. And I did put in a praying spirit because that could have been in there, but I decided to dramatize that in a way that spoke to me, as well as a few other songs that I felt show the sisters in a just a splendid light, in terms of performance and in terms of just highlighting like what they do individually as singers and collectively as a group. So I had a lot of fun doing everything that's creative about storytelling and working with other creative people. And if I may take 1 second to just talk about the creative genius that is Aunjanue Ellis.
No, you can't. She about to go.
No, as it
She
pertains
got
to the
somebody at the
Clark
door. You hear her?
sisters, I kind of came into this storytelling with, my point of view, my vision, and my goals, right? And then I encountered like this creative entity that was Aunjanue Ellis. And at a certain point, I was like, I'm going to step back for 1 second and let her have the floor in the way that she showed up, in terms of her commitment and just in terms of her like tenacity, because it took a lot of tenacity to do what we did in the time frame that we were given and with the constraints that we had. There's always constraints though, so it's not a big deal, but I felt like I got to experience on some level creative genius happening in real time. And that is just working with not only Aunjanue, but some of the other, the girls who just brought like tremendous voices
Oh my God.
to the storytelling that I believe will be a hallmark of this particular movie. It will be something that people will remember and talk about. How do we honor these geniuses with fakeness? I couldn't reconcile that, right? So that's how the whole idea came up in my mind, that let's get real singers from the gospel tradition who can sing and really can interpret the music in the proper way. So we don't have people lip syncing, and I'm not saying great actresses can't do that, because I know they can, and I've done it with a great actress before. I'm not saying that, but I just felt that there was another layer of storytelling that could be told vocally by having Donald Lawrence using those voices to then create the sound that mimicked the Clark sisters in a way that is just astounding, mind-blowing, where the Clark sisters themselves were kind of overwhelmed with happiness that these girls could properly get them vocally and pay tribute to them in that way. So I just felt like on a great level, it's fun to play with other creative people, and it was so much fun to do that with Aunjanue. Like no, I don't think I ever wanted to throw a shoe at you, Aunjanue, at all. But
Okay.
but at a certain point, like maybe I had way more energy, and I'd be like, Aunjanue, we'd be working late into the night, like just coming up with ideas to make the story better. And I think a few times Aunjanue was like, listen, I got to get to sleep. Like, I got 1 hour and then I got to go to bed, and like, I'm like, okay. And then the next morning I'm like, okay, let's start again, that was so much fun. And
I say she's a warrior. That's what I'm talking about. That's what I'm talking about. Because I believe if you are going to open your mouth to tell a story about a Black woman, you can't take shorts. I mean that for myself as somebody who wants to continue telling stories about Black women. I want to do it right. I don't want to just be glad that I did it. I want to do it right. And like as Christine said, I want to do it well.
Yeah.
You know, I don't want us to be glad, oh, well, it's on Lifetime. Well, it's on BET. You know, all these exceptions that we give ourselves, that it should stand up to any measure, any standard ever, because we're telling stories about us.
I don't look at the outlet. I'm looking at the product and the film as like I treat any film. It doesn't matter, how it's showcased. My goals are no different. You aim high.
It should be. It should be. You should aim high, no matter what. Yeah.
And to that end, I felt in many ways like Lifetime was very generous in terms of giving me the tools to create the best movie that I could create. So I'm very appreciative of Lifetime and the platform to tell these women's story today. They didn't have to do it, and they didn't have to do it on the scale that they did. And I believe in terms of their commitment behind what they're doing in terms of promoting it, they're they did their part. The failures are always going to be in every film. I've never had all the money in the world, and I've never had all the time in the world. So, and who's to say if you had all that, you would create perfection, more time, more money, but we were given a lot by Lifetime, and this was a great opportunity and experience for me on so many levels that were great.
Good. I think we can end on that note. I thank you both for sharing your testimonies on this journey.
Testimony, that's the word for the day, girl.
Exactly.